So, hi penguins, it's Irene speaking, and today I wanted to talk about my favorite books that I read in 2023. You may be wondering why I am so late for this video. It's because I finished reading my last book on December 29th. So I wanted to be 100% sure it didn't become one of my favorite of the year. It wasn't. Overall, throughout the year, I read a lot this year. I was very satisfied because the past years, 2021, 2022, I wasn't really satisfied with how much I read. So this year, finally, I was able to read up to my standards when I was a kid, which is amazing. I love reading. I didn't think I would have said it again, but I love reading. And I wanted to share my favorites. A couple of these books have really reignited my love for reading this year. I read them and I was like, I want to read more. There's a trilogy that I read all this year. I think you might guess what it is. Then there's a couple of classics, and then there's a graphic novel which I read in like 2 days, and another book which is a bit weird. It's a book that is most known as a movie. I'll go into it first, actually, I think. So, one last thing before we start. If you haven't read 30 books, 50 books, 40 books, that's fine. I didn't actually reach my goal of how many books I wanted to read this year, but you know what? I read like 2 books per month, sometimes even 3. That's amazing. And if you don't have time, if you aren't able to read that fast, it's fine. You know, it's better to read 1 book in 1 entire year than reading 100 and then like mixing up the plots or whatever. And if you feel like this new year you want to read more, you need to look into that first. You need to think if you want to read more because you genuinely want to read more books, like for your enjoyment, or if you want to show off on Goodreads, look, I read 100 books this year, because I think that in the long run that is not healthy at all. Like, it's good to have a bit of competition about bringing yourself down because you didn't read as many books as someone you don't even know on social media. I think that is very unhealthy, and I don't think you need me to tell you that, but I just felt like with the community I am in on social media, I think it's kind of necessary to speak up about it a little bit. So as I said, the first book I want to be talking about, it's a book that I think is most well known as a movie. The movie adaptation of the book is the thing that comes to mind first when thinking about it. I think it's actually not everyone knows that it was a book first. I knew it because I was told. This book is Fight Club, which I do not own. I got from my uncle, so I don't have it with me now. I read it in April, or maybe April going on May, around that time. I don't think it's really controversial. I don't think it's really controversial to say about Fight Club as it is with other books to movie adaptation, that I don't know if I like the movie or the book better. I think that they're both very, very good. I think they're both really up there. I think I gave 5 stars to the book and 4.5 to the movie. I'll have to go check on Letterboxd. Because the things that I really like about the movie that aren't in the book are balanced by the things I like in the book that aren't in the movie. So, first of all, I think that the book is more unhinged than the movie. The book really throws stuff at you. I think that the things that are described in the book sometimes are hit harder than the ones that you see in the movie, or at least that was personally for me. The narrator has a hole in his cheek for the entirety of the movie, and for the entirety of the book, and I get why they didn't do it in the movie, because that would have taken an effort. They couldn't really just assault Edward Norton, as my nice friend put it once. And I actually did read this book because I have a friend who is obsessed with the movie, and they took the movie off Netflix, and I wanted to rewatch it because I had already watched it, and I was like, I just read the book, you know, I want to consume more Fight Club. One thing I really liked about the book is that in the movie, the narrator is a character. It is it's the main character of the movie, yes, but in the movie he has a personality. He feels like he is supposed to be someone who is like a basic description of a man in society, you know, working his job, having a lot of repressed anger, but in the movie I feel he is much more distinct, whereas in the books he really feels like just a guy, you know, a random person. You have nothing about him. You don't know like his physical description. You don't have a one. You obviously don't have a name. That happens in the movie too. I feel he really could be your cousin. You know, you don't have anything to go from that you can say, he is this. Whereas Tyler is a full-on character. I think Tyler really feels very similar to the movie. I don't recall anything really different about Tyler from the books and Tyler from the movie. Except one more thing, Tyler also, if I remember correctly, isn't described physically. Like, you don't get like, oh, Tyler was tall, Tyler was blonde, Tyler wore like what was that, like red leather jacket he wears in the movie. You don't know anything about Tyler either, which I think really accentuates the feeling of, you know, who is Tyler? Where does he come from? Why did he blow up his house? The book also has this interesting writing style, which is based on repetition. Almost every chapter has one line. For example, the second chapter, which is about the narrator meeting Tyler, like, he doesn't meet him on a plane in the book. He meets him in another situation. I think, for example, that is one thing I feel is done better in the book, in the movie. I think that the meeting with Tyler is much more iconic, the way it is in the movie than it is in the book. And he is talking about the airplanes and the airports, and every once in a while during that chapter he keeps saying, like, you wake up in this airport, then you wake up in this airport, then you wake up in this airport. And the repetition of you wake up in name of the airport, I think, is really effective to really point out how repetitive the life of the narrator is. And in general, there's a lot of similar moments, similar structures in many other chapters of the book. Final thing about the movie, I really liked Marla in the movie more, I think, because again, in the book she isn't really fleshed out much, as every character is, or isn't, should I say. There isn't the most iconic line of the movie. I think that everyone who thinks of Fight Club thinks of the final scene of the movie. So also the line, you met me at a very strange time in my life. That line isn't in the book. And I mean, the ending of the book is completely different to that of the movie. I think you should know it if you go reading it, having watched the movie. Because the ending of the movie is such an iconic part of it that, you know, going into the book, expecting to read it, I think you will feel a bit disappointed. Finding out that there wasn't that line, I think I was a bit shocked. Like, the movie actually improved on the book. That is such a wild concept. I'm not really used to. The ending of the movie, and I think it was also said by the author of the book, is much better because it feels more like a climax. Whereas in the book, I think they were just chilling around. Like, okay, it was actually a serious thing, but it felt very more calm. And then there's a bunch of characters that show up at the end of the book, which doesn't really make much sense. So I think that putting the ending of the movie in the book would have been a much better idea. And I mean, obviously you couldn't change the ending of the book, but I think they did a good job with the ending of the movie. And the book ends in a very like the last chapter of the movie It's a very surprising thing, which I get where I wanted to go, and it feels nice. But the ending of the movie is just on a whole other level, and that's what I meant when I said that the good things about both balance out each other. So I don't have a favorite between the movie and the book. I usually prefer the books, as a lot of people do. I never found myself liking the movie more than the book. I thought it was going to be the case, but I like them both about the same amount. The next book I want to be talking about is Persepolis. There is a movie for this one too, and my cousin lent it to me, but I haven't watched it yet. As I said, I read this one in a couple of days because it's very fast. You know, it's all comic book. I mean, it's all drawn. So if you don't know what Persepolis is about the life of the author living in Iran in the 70s and 80s, and then moving to Austria on her own as a teenager to escape from dictatorship, and then coming back to Iran after a couple of years in Austria. First of all, I want to really praise the drawing style. The way the characters are drawn, even if they are pretty basic, I think that they are very expressive. It's a very raw style. Like, certain scenes are very strong and powerful, and I really like the style it's drawn. I feel it's very dramatic. First of all, I didn't really know much about Iran, but I wanted to because of the very recent things that are happening, and because I met a couple of Iranian people throughout the past year, actually 2022. And so I think this is a very good read to have an overview of the more recent history of Iran, and also to get the personal story of the author, because I think the beginning, the first half of the graphic novel is more focused on Iran and her growing up in Iran, but the second half is more about her migrating to Austria and meeting these artists and meeting these people who are politically involved, starting to learn about drugs and whatever, first love. But it doesn't really weigh on you. You don't particularly feel like, oh, it gets really just about herself. I think it's a very interesting story at the same time, but I think that the second half of the graphic novel is kind of overlooked. You know, when people describe it, they describe it as her childhood in Tehran, but I think that, it's a reasonable... Wait, I found it. It's a reasonable chunk of the book that is set in Austria. About this, except for the final part, is set in Austria. I'm really interested in the history of especially Iran, Persian history, the language. There's a part of the world that really fascinates me, so I don't know if you have any suggestions, please let me know, because this book really interested me and I want to really learn more. I'm really interested in that. This was a 5-star read, by the way. Here's the next book I want to be talking about. It's obviously Les Miserables. I think you just noticed that I don't speak French. I had to ask my mom for the pronunciation. Yeah. I don't know really where to start with a book like this. I had to read it for a school book club, which really scared me, because we settled on this, and as soon as I left the room, I was I don't know if I'll survive the summer. I had to read it in 3 months. In fact, I also hugely used the audiobook because in 3 months I couldn't have finished this. I actually think I finished it the day I had at least an hour of audiobook every day, and then I tried to read a bit of the book too, and I still finished it the day before, because a problem this book and a lot of classics of like the 19th century have is that it just loses itself in some weird digressions. At one point it starts describing pursuer system, and I know it's a problem with other books like Moby Dick, where the story is amazing and so interesting and you are so involved, and then it just drops on you this bomb of exposition and it's not very good, much a good thing, but I understand it's a book of its time. You know, it's things that would be interesting in a vacuum, but not where you are interrupting the climax of the story, where two of the main characters are about to die basically. So, and you just yes, the pursuer system, no, it's really just putting these elements alongside other elements. It's a bit confusing and it kind of kills a bit of the flow of the story. But when the story flows, oh man, if it flows, it really flows. I was very involved in the story, and I think it at some points it felt like, I wouldn't say a soap opera, but like a TV series in a good way, because it follows the point of view of different characters but still narrates in third person. Point of view shifts to characters we've never seen before. So maybe a character who appears in the first half of the book, since it takes it takes like 20 years, a character that appears in the first half of the book maybe will appear in the second half, and you, the reader, by the description that the characters makes of him or her, you notice, oh, is it this guy? But the character doesn't know it, so you're like, oh my god, because that guy is related to his father, it's all crazy. I was startled. It really took me off guard, because I don't think we are pretty much used to reading classics and being involved in the plot, because we see classics as detached from us. Les Mis was written in 1870, I think. I'm not sure. Yeah, around that time in the 19th century. So hearing about like poverty and injustice and revolution of more than 200 years ago, because it's also set at the beginning of the 19th century, feel the same thing that you feel now in 2024. And it is in a way comforting, and it is in a way scary that we just never change. So yeah, read Les Mis and act up on your life, okay? Change the world. Read classics and change the world. The final thing I want to say about this book is talking about the main character, Jean Valjean. Because when we talked about it at the book club, we compared Jean Valjean to the Nameless in The Betrothed. Why? I don't think it's a spoiler. I don't think it's like I can spoil you The Betrothed, especially if you are Italian, because we studied in school. Spoiler warning for The Betrothed and Les Mis, okay? Basically, the Nameless in The Betrothed, he had some thoughts where he was like, hey, maybe murdering people is wrong. And then he meets Lucia, and he sees that she's so devout and so innocent. And so during the night, he feels God again, and he repents, and he converts himself to believing God again. And it's very effective to read it, but then he just changes. He transforms. Okay, and sorry if I don't believe that the man who is so scary that people are afraid to pronounce his name, suddenly meets a cardinal and is a different person. Even if actually Cardinal Borromeo in the best order is very cool. Like, he looks very badass. In Lemine, the main character, Jean Valjean, is an ex-convict, spent 19 years in prison. A priest lets him into his house when he gets out of prison, and the first things he does is steal from this priest's house and the church. And when the police catches him, the priest is like, no, I gave all those things to him, and lets him go. So he realizes that the priest is giving him a second chance, and he decides to start acting up on his life, just like I told you to do a couple of minutes ago. So he he doesn't just, okay, I want to change, and the rest of the book is him being a great guy. He often hesitates and is often on the verge of seriously harming other people because they were menacing him or people he cared about. And so you often see him hesitate, being unsure of what to do. But a lot of the plot lines are just stellar. And when characters come back in the book and they're like, oh my god, but you are that guy, just felt incredible. It's so full of these twists, and you should read it. You must read it. Okay, you must read Lemmy. I actually do have an idea to compare this book and The Betrothed, but I think I will need to read other novels of that time before I do it, so you will see it very far in the future. This video is going to be a nightmare to edit. Okay, we only have 2 books left. I can finally rest because this video is taking me so long. Here is A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. I think this video is going to have a lot of intense whiplash because I'll be talking about Lemmy one moment and then A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. But that is just how I am. Us readers, I think not just me, we're kind of silly. We just read everything. But yeah, this book, I think I read it in a day. It actually took me less to read A Good Girl's Guide to Murder than it took me to read Persepolis. Because I read it in 2 days while I read A Good Girl's Guide to Murder in 1 day. For a reason, because I was getting very invested in the story and I was trying to figure out who was the actual murderer, if it was Sal, which everyone thought he was, or if it was someone else. In fact, I won't spoil this one because it's a fairly recent book. I wasn't really expecting that. I think that the first book, I wasn't I figured it towards the end of the book, but I wasn't, I didn't understand it immediately. One thing I was very worried about was that having, teenagers as the main characters, being very popular on Bookstagram and BookTok, I felt like it wasn't going to be focusing much on the actual mystery, but a lot on like friendship and relationship, which is a good thing. Like, I would have liked it still. I would have read it, a book like that, because like the second book I think focuses more on that and I liked it. But I really wanted to read a mystery book. I wanted to read it for the mystery, to unpack all the case. So I think this book really does it very well. I think that the first book especially is perfect on that because it doesn't waste time. There are no chapters where you feel like, oh my god, is she going to just waste this chapter talking about drama with her friends and with Ravi? No, it doesn't waste a chapter. Every chapter is focused on what it needs to be focused on. This is also another idea for a video about the stereotypes and the pet peeves that I have about books. The cliches I hate. When reading it, at one point, my head was burning, my eyes were burning, my head was pounding. The tension was building up, and I wanted to see where it was going. So I think that is the reason why I read it so quick. It also reads very quick. The dialogue is very on point. I read it in Italian, so I don't know, but apparently it's very British. It's still, I think, a book for teens, because it does have a lot of that, teenagers doing a thing by themselves and the adults are kind of incompetent. It's kind of silly how a girl can solve a case that's been closed for 5 years doing her homework. But I think that the suspension of disbelief thing works very well with this book. I think that you can get very involved into it. I think that the thing that it gets very heavy and you're like, it's not very believable, happens with the third book more than this one. This one, I think it's acceptable, but obviously, if you are a much more seasoned reader of mysteries and you are like an adult in your 30s or your 40s, I get why you wouldn't like it. So I really recommend this to other teens or people maybe in their 20s, but not if you are a seasoned reader of mystery. I think I this one really made me go, I think I want to read more mystery, actually, after this one. So recommend me also other mysteries to read after this one. And that's it. On to the final book. It really got me back into reading this year. I read it in March, and in January and February I really wanted to read more. And when I picked this one up, I read it very quickly too. I think that when I read a book very quickly, it's a sign that I liked it. And that is why I say it about all these books. The other books, it took me a month to read them, I swear. It's The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I was starstruck by this book. It is amazing. I have no words to describe it. I read it made me feel so many emotions. I don't know what to say about it. What can I say about it? I already feel like I want to reread it. It's so good. The way that this story is told and it unfolds, with this celebrity where you're like, she's so famous, everyone knows everything about her, but she wants to be telling her story. She wants to talk about who she is, and she doesn't lie. She tells the truth. She tells the good and the bad things, and she wants just to know who she really loved. Because she had 7 husbands, and everyone is always like, who was a real love? She explains it finally after 60 or more years, actually, I think, of hiding it. And you can see how many tabs I put and how many pages I underlined in this one. The way she talks about the life and the relationships that she had with Harry and Celia in her life, like how different the way she approached both of them were, I think were very touching. There is some chapters where I just legit cried. There's a bit of a twist towards the end, which I did not see coming, which I just cried. Okay, I'm not ashamed to admit I cried while reading a book, because it means it affected me emotionally. I want to be writing a book that will make my readers cry, and that they will remember it as a positive thing that they cried. If it feels like I have little to say, it's because it's one of those books that I just purely like, mostly for the vibes. The analysis on the attitude that people had towards homosexuality in the past 70 plus years, I think is very good, because of how the various characters react, and the various characters also talk about it. I think that when they talk about how even inside of the community, a lot of times bisexual people are just called straight or homosexuals without raising the fact that they are attracted by both genders. I think that was very effective. I really felt it, even by their own partners. That is what I mean. I think that really affected me. I really felt it. It's still true. When I actually listened to the audiobook of Daisy Jones and the Six, and that to me felt like they were a real band, because you actually heard the voices of the different characters. At some points I had to be like, wait a minute, Daisy Jones and the Six don't actually exist. Whereas with Evelyn Hugo, I was constantly aware that it was a fictional story. But I mean, because it is a fictional story, I don't think that it really goes to the detriment of the book. But yeah, I mean, with all these other books, it felt like I was reading a fictional story, except maybe for Lemmy. Lemmy, I mean, obviously not Persepolis, because that is a true story, but all the other books obviously were fictional. My final consideration for this year. I just noticed that all the books that I have in my list for the best books I have read this year, there is actually not any fantasy book. Like, all of these books are real or inspired by real stories. In the end, I think they're all true. I mean, they're not true stories, but they have this element of realism. So maybe next year I should have a more fantasy story as my favorite. But yeah, overall I really enjoyed reading this year, and I cannot wait to read more books in 2024, and I cannot wait to find hopefully a new favorite, and I cannot wait to go reread Seven Husbands as soon as I stop recording this video. I did read a couple, or maybe one. I did read one I did read at least one book published in 2023, which is The Sun and the Star, but I still haven't finished it. Still like about halfway through. And yeah, so I think that in 2024, I really wish to read books published in 2023 and 2024, because I do have a couple published in the past years that I didn't read. So that is one wish I have for next year. So let me know what your favorite books you read this year were. Read the books just published, or you read older books, classics, whatever. Let me know. I'm very interested in other people's opinions. If you like the books I presented, if you hated the books I presented, because sometimes the reason why people don't like a book is more interesting than the reason why they like a book, if they have some valid criticism. So yeah, just let me know whatever you want me to know. I will read, hopefully, everything that you write. Please subscribe. I need to feed my imaginary friends. And bye, penguins. This is Irene checking out.